So, so just to share my screen, to share, and here we go. So I just wanted to show you the Usman report, not my Zoom screen. So here is, let's go to the original. Can everybody see this page from archive.org? Sabrina, I see you. You can see it? Yeah. Okay, so the original report is available on archive.org, as you can see, and it consists of volume 1 and volume 2, and volume 2 has the bits that we translated. So these are the vernacular submissions. So this is publicly accessible here on archive.org. You can find it under Usman Report on the Indigenous Systems of Medicine by Muhammad Usman. Then I would like to show you where our published volume is. It's on eJIM, the e-journal of Indian Medicine, which you can find here under indianmedicine.nl. And so if you just scroll down a bit, our Usman report here is under the supplements of the electronic journal of Indian Medicine, and you can get the PDF here. And if you click the PDF, you get to the full volume. So in other words, our volume is open access, publicly available for anyone who is interested. So feel free to share it among your friends as much as possible. It's also downloadable. But if you want a hard copy, you can buy one. It is published with Barclays. And for the not small sum of 87 euros, so that's something to consider if you really want a hard copy of the book. And then finally, I just want to show you our project website, which was ayuryog.org, and I put that into the chat as well for you to look up what other things the project has been up to. Here I will stop my share. So all of these links should be in the chat. The only thing is if you joined a little bit later, you might not see them. I can post them again later. So I became aware of this report, of the Usman report, in the early 2000s when I was working on a project on modern and global forms of Ayurveda at Cambridge University. And in the edited volume that resulted from this project, which I incidentally got here. So here it is, Modern and Global Ayurveda, which I co-edited with Frederick Smith. There's an article, incidentally by my husband, Dominic Wujastik, on various government reports on Indian medicine published before and after independence, addressing the question of the role of indigenous forms of medicine in public healthcare in India. And so from this article, the Usman report struck me as particularly interesting because it was one of the very early reports, but especially because it contained in it the voices of indigenous practitioners, as it were, on their medicine. So the questionnaire sent by the Usman Committee to the practitioners addressing indigenous practices in their theoretical, practical, economic, and institutional aspects. So this report provides us with a snapshot of the practices and socio-political positionings of those practicing traditional medicines in India at the beginning of the 20th century. So the report is unusual for giving the Vaidyas and Hakims an opportunity to present their medicine and to argue for its inclusion in an emerging national healthcare system. Hence the title of this event, Let the Vaidyas Speak. Should have said let the Vaidyas and Hakims speak. So the sort of self-denomination of the various practitioners. So one of the extraordinary features of the report is its multilinguality. Testimonies by practitioners were submitted in 8 different languages, including English, but also Sanskrit, Urdu, Tamil, Oriya, Malayalam, Telugu, and Kannada. And the committee received 183 written submissions to their questionnaire, not to the report. The overwhelming majority of submissions were in Tamil. There were 76 testimonies. Of those, only 10 made it into the report. By contrast, 11 testimonies in Sanskrit were submitted, and 10 of those were published. 24 were submitted in Malayalam. Only 1 was included in the published version. 9 in Urdu, 5 made it in. So what made it into the report was 42 English language testimonies, 10 Sanskrit language, 5 Urdu, 10 Tamil, 1 Telugu, 1 Malayalam, 1 Kannada, and 1 Oriya testimony. So most of the chosen testimonies represent traditional Ayurveda. So we can discern some bias of the committee, let's say, towards the orthodoxy of indigenous methods, Ayurvedic tradition. Nevertheless, it remains extraordinary that the report records for posterity the vernacular voices of a range of practitioners. And it is these vernacular testimonies that were translated in our publication here. So the richness of the Usman Report is as a primary source to the diversity and shared preoccupations of frontline Indian medical professionals is only now beginning to be appreciated. And our translations, your translations of the vernacular submissions are an effort to expand the usefulness and accessibility of this extremely significant historic testimony. The thing that makes this report so special is the aspect that created the most difficulties, in other words, its multilinguality. This was not a project that a single person could take on easily, so it was my task and that of my colleague and co-editor of the volume, Dr. Christelle Barrois, to find scholars able to translate the various parts of the project, of the report, and some of these went through, excuse me, several hands. So I'm delighted to welcome several members, not all, of our esteemed team of translators today, and look forward to hearing their accounts of their translations. But first, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Christelle Barrois, former postdoctoral research fellow in the IRIO project and co-editor of the volume. Thank you, Christelle.
Yes, the sound is okay? Yes. So thank you very much, Dagmar. You said almost all detailed introducing the Usman Report, which is actually a complex work in 2 volumes. It's really not easy to circulate in this text at first sight, and also there are different registers. There are some kind of statement, there are some very local testimonies, and in between some indexes, and it's not so easy. The first thing, so I'm just giving a few, let's say, personal impression from this experience. I was not at all prepared, actually, I must say, to do that. And because I am a Sanskritist, and because I had to deal with this Tamil part. And even though I spent many years in Tamil Nadu, I'm not Tamili, so I'm not able to speak in Tamil, and I can read, but it's very little, my knowledge of Tamil. So for me first, I'm very happy for this event because the translation of the Usman Report is finally published. And also because for me, it's a pleasure to have an opportunity to meet all the translators. Because I did not, for the moment, you alone, Dagmar, because you took care of the finalization of this volume for these last 2 years, mostly. You know everybody, this is not my case. And I would like also to mention the names of the translators who worked on the text, but who are not present, and who have spared, I would say, because I saw that no time and effort to establish even a first translation, complete or partial, of some of the testimonies. First, Prakash Venkatesan just began to work on the Tamil part, and I met him thanks to Kanan, head of the Department of Tamil Literature at the French Institute of Pondicherry. And then after Prakash, Lingeshwaran Venkatesh Varalu came, and he just worked very hard on some 4 articles on Tamil. For the Tamil parts, I'm also very grateful to Mary Bosman for her dedication, and I would say more for determination, you know, at some point to the copy editing of the text, you know. And finally, for the other, let's say, South Dravidian languages, I would like to mention Manesh Mohanan for Malayalam, Santalir Sivalingam for Kannada, and Devakami Kritartha for Telugu. Yes. Actually, I did not know the existence of the Usman Report until Dagmar arrived one morning in office. In Vienna, we used to share the same office. And it was in September, October 2016. And I was, by this time, preparing for a stay of several months at the French Institute of Pondicherry. And Dagmar, you said something like, you're going to be in Tamil Nadu. So could you please find a translator who would know Tamil and Siddha medicine? Just to translate the Tamil part of the Usman Report. And actually, gradually, we realize the difficulty and the length of the text. And finally, more than 5 years later, this translation is published. And I say again, extremely happy with that. And I feel it is a collective work of great interest, as it's testified for the practice of practitioner with their own words at the beginning of the 20th century. I would like to add that I feel the Usman Report will give rise to further academic research with different methodological approaches are possible. I would say sociology, history of science, and as well as also post-colonial studies. I'm thinking in particular to the history of Siddha medicine, of course, which is yet to be built, constructed. It is still not clear, the history of this medicine, because actually the Usman Report is something like the first time where the Siddha is mentioned, the Siddha medicine is mentioned in a report, you know, it's the first, it's a kind of the beginning of the institutionalization of this medicine. So it is something important in particular for the testimonies of this medicine. And finally, so I must say I learned a lot. I'm grateful to you, Dagmar, for just asking me just to be part of that. And also I discovered some kind of very beautiful tools to go through Tamil Siddha medicine. And I'm thinking about the immense Tamil dictionary. It's a Tamil English dictionary of medicine. The title is Medicine, Chemistry, Botany, and Allied Sciences. It dates from 1931, and it has been just written, I imagine, not alone. There are many, many volumes by Sambasivam Pillai. And this dictionary fixes the use of the Tamil terms in Siddha medicine at the beginning of the 20th century, but after the Usman Report. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I should say Christella's thanking me now. For the last 5 years, she's been mostly cursing me for taking her onto this project. But I think it is time now for us to move on to our translators who did a lot of the work, most of the work, the bulk of the work indeed, in bringing this report to you today. And so as I mentioned, there are 8 different languages, one of which is English, which we did not translate. So we have Sanskrit, Malayalam, Urdu, Tamil, Kannada, and Oriya. and Telugu. Our translators today, we didn't manage to get everybody to come today, but we've got a good selection of our translators, and we'd like to start with the single Malayalam testimony that made it into the report. And so for that, I would like to address our translators, Dr. Lisa Brook and Dr. Madan Kumar, who took over the Malayalam report. And I hope it's okay if I just address you both, so maybe you can both unmute yourselves. And I'd like to just start with, so you translated the Malayalam testimony, and I'd like you to just tell us about your academic background or what your connection is to the contents of the Usman report. Please, Dr. Brooks, maybe start.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Dagmar and Christel, for this project, and congratulations to all of the translators on your huge work. Ours was very small. It was 4 pages. So I can only imagine what some of you were working with. So my training comes from an interdisciplinary area studies department with a strong focus on language training, the Department of South and Southeast Asian Studies at Berkeley. And my training there was actually focused on Sanskrit and also Pali and on translation, my language training. And my Malayalam training began only after I was already living in Kerala and conducting field research. And I was at the AIIS in Trivandrum, Kerala with Dr. Bindu, and received most of my substantive Malayalam training there. My own work is at the crossroads of the history of medicine, with a focus on early Ayurvedic medicine, like textual and translation studies and medical anthropology. And in India, I ended up spending most of my time in Ayurvedic clinics with a range of physicians, including Dr. Madan, who kindly agreed to co-translate this with me, across religion and caste. And my research also involved looking at how physicians were engaging with biomedicine, with their institutional Ayurvedic education, because everyone I worked with had institutional Ayurvedic education, and with classical Sanskrit treatises. So this is my entry point into the Usman report, which addresses these very questions at a very different time period. So I've spent a lot of my time as a translator working with very long, very old treatises and their commentaries. So I spend a lot of time thinking about the strands and the argument of a text. And in this testimony, we really tried to retain the flavor of the Malayalam and to include a number of Malayalam and Sanskrit terms so that the reader can see when Dr. Mus is specifically, drawing on the Sanskritic tradition, or what kinds of terms he's using in terms of Malayalam and Sanskrit. And I think associating himself with the Sanskritic tradition was important because of his lineage. He was a lineage Ashtabhaijan physician. So trying to make that transparent in our translation.
Yeah, it was very nice for me to see his name, because I know some of his, his family, so some of his lineage, people who I visited also in Kerala some years ago, who were in Dr. Ravi Mus, Dr. E.T. Devakara Mus, same name, in fact. So it was very nice to see this report pop up in the Usman report for me. Dr. Madan, can you tell us about your background? You'll need to unmute yourself. Are you, sorry, Dr. Madan, we can't hear you because you're still muted. Can you unmute yourself? It's at the bottom.
Yeah. Sorry. So first of all, I would like to congratulate all the people who has worked in this translation. It looks like it was like I was surprised to see this work. Honestly, when I was first talked about this project by Dr. Lisa Brooks, that we have to do such a work. And because I have learned this when I have done my BMS, when I have done my graduation education, so there we should write a paper known as history, which is known as Itihasam paper for graduation of BMS. So at that time, I have read that, okay, there was such a report, Usman report, which is like we used to write, which we have to study for our exams. So, but later never I thought about such a report, and I was surprised to see that I am going to be a small part of that translation. Thank you for this opportunity. That I would thank you both, yourself and Dr. Lisa Brooks for this opportunity. I'm working as like my background for Ayurveda is I'm an Ayurvedic doctor. I have done my Bachelor of Ayurvedic Bachelor of BAMS education from Coimbatore Ayurveda Pharmacy, late Padma Shri. So then I did my post-graduation in Ayurveda Anatomy, which is called as Rajana Shariram. So that I have done in, it's in Karnataka, Mudabadri, from Rajiv Gandhi University. And currently I am working in Government Ayurveda Medical College, Trivandrum Ayurveda College in the Anatomy Department as an assistant professor there. So my education and my relation with Ayurveda is almost related with South Indian, many of the South Indian places. And currently I'm doing some of my research works in Ayurveda in Gujarat, in Vadodara, in Parle University for my PhD. So that's my background with Ayurveda. And I'm not an official translation type of person in my regular curriculum. I'm teaching Ayurveda, that's my main job.
Yeah, we've been very lucky to have you and also Dr. Trupti Patel-Bola as Ayurvedic practitioners on board for these translations to give a sort of insider view of the contents of the report.
Yeah, and I personally know Ravi Moose, so, because he's president of the AMA Association, Thrissur. So I know Ravi Moose. So, but I was not knowing that Ravi Moose and the connection between E.T. Diwakar Moose was not known for me until yesterday. Because I was just knowing Ravi Moose, that's all. So that's a thing. So I had a word with him and he was like, I just shared him this thing and he was telling some things regarding the contributions towards his family and at Ayurveda. So that's much information, and I shared this one report, but the thing is, like, I have shared this information with many of the Ayurvedic people around here. Honestly speaking, I didn't get any response yet. It's already 24 hours. So, so that's the truth. And some people even ask me, what is this report? Is it any recent report from the government? That's also a question I got from some of my officials. Is it any new report which came from the Modi government? So that is also being asked by some of the people. I have that questions with me right now. So I'm still waiting for more responses and I will keep you updated what the response of the students from Ayurveda is. I have given this report about the students also. So let me see what's the academic group talk about this. Anyway, congratulating all of you for this debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we'll have to see what the reactions are long term. The report is now out for all to read, and some things take a while to pick up. Now we have years to come in which people can use this as a resource. I'd be very excited if it was used in Ayurvedic circles in India. That would be very interesting, I think. And there's I think some of the voices of the report are, some of the things they say are still relevant today. So if I may ask, so what both Dr. Brooks and Dr. Kumar, what was your main takeaway from the chapters you translated? What stood out to you most, or from the chapter what stood out to you most, and what stayed with you, and why? What was the sort of most interesting thing for you about the report, your chapter?
I can start. I think that Vajan Divakaran Moose really stringently believes that Ayurveda and what he either refers to as Western medicine or English medicine have different theoretical bases, different aims, and they should remain separate. And he does not think that traditional practitioners should receive conventional scientific training in biomedicine or anatomy. And he was well traveled in India. I learned this recently as well, talking to Dr. Madan and doing some research online. And he does note in the report that he spent time with Western physicians and he himself had tried to do some integration, but he didn't find it working well. In his own words, he thinks that it weakens the Ayurvedic practice. He does support government support for Ayurvedic education, funding, and the establishment of regulations and licensure. So I think just he has a really strong sense of, and not surprisingly, because probably he's a Ashtavijin lineage physician with pretty high status. Like I think there's a protective sense around the Ayurvedic practice in his testimony.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I was just wondering, why do you think he wrote in Malayalam rather than in Sanskrit?
Could you repeat that because it cut it blurred?
Of course, yes. I was just wondering why he submitted the report in Malayalam rather than in Sanskrit, given his very traditional training. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would love to hear what Dr. Mutton says about that, but my instinct is that there's also a lot of, he really talks about Natta Vaijam, like indigenous medicine in Kerala as well. And I think there's a great sense of pride about being Malayali and being, I think there's a strong identification, like he uses a lot of Sanskrit terms when he's talking about the theory of Ayurveda, but it wouldn't even occur to me that he would necessarily submit it in Sanskrit. So yeah, there's such a sense of pride in his sort of Malayali identity or Carolan identity. And I would love to see the unpublished, I wonder where they are, the unpublished testimonies to see, because this feels like we only have one perspective of a very elite physician here.
That is true. I mean, it was 24 submissions in Malayalam, so 23 others are somewhere and still await reading. I think that would be a really interesting project in itself, to just go to the archive and see what is there. Yeah, Dr. Madan, do you have something to add to this?
Yes, of course, one thing very significant is report what he has explained, because now there's a lot of talkings and a lot of meetings and everything always on the education part of regarding the university or from universities, like what kind of reforms has to take place in Ayurveda education. So there is a two kind of argument, because some of the schools want it to be completely Ayurvedic focused educational system, and the other group is telling like the new translational Ayurveda, it's like comparative Ayurvedic study, because they've studied 50% Ayurveda, 50% modern. And it's like, that's what they call it as more modernizing Ayurvedic education system. So now we are also in a course of bridge course, means like you just complete BA, MS degree, and then you can practice allopathic medicines. So that kind of course transition is also taking place. So at this point, when we read the presentation by E.T. Divagaran, sir, it shows that he was very much into the practice of Ayurveda, which is like now it's because as we see that it is only a minority group now in the whole part of the, maybe in the south part of India, who say that like we use the word Shuddha Ayurveda group of people, who is mostly means like pure Ayurvedic group of people who say that everything has to be done in an Ayurvedic way. Ayurveda has to be understood in an Ayurvedic way, not by a translation. So he was mostly promoting that kind of education system. That's very clear, which has to be, means that the same argument which we have today with the government as well as the education policy makers was existing during that period also. So it's the same, the situation has not changed. And regarding the second point you asked, like why he has written it in Malayalam also, he was been making sure in this first part itself, he was telling that I don't want to talk much regarding this. Whatever I have to talk directly. I don't want to express it more in a letter form. I have a lot to talk, but I am just concluding some major points. That's all he is telling in that. Means he want to talk more regarding this, and his viewpoint is, he was very much, what I felt was very adamant in expressing his viewpoints very concisely. And mostly he was emphasizing on the Ashtanga Hridayam tradition very clearly in his conversation. That I could make out from his, he was neither doing a lot of like Sushruta based of talking was also not there, nor Charakam. It was like that Ashtanga Hridayam tradition was like highlighted in his talk. Maybe that Ashtanga Hridayam tradition is mostly in a Malayalam Sanskrit combination. So even we read it in Malayalam, I felt it's like without knowing Sanskrit, you can't understand what exactly he is talking about. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, both Dr. Brooks and Dr. Kumar, and maybe we can get back to you a little bit later, but I'd like to move on a little bit to Sanskrit, in fact, and to what I consider the most heroic of our translators, namely Dr. Trupti Patil Bhole, who I just actually cannot see in the group of people. Oh, maybe I moved on a bit too fast. Can't actually see her. Oh, I'm so sorry. So Trupti somehow has disappeared right now. So I will not be moving on to Trupti. I do apologize, and instead ask another translator of a Sanskrit portion, namely Dr. Jane Allred, to talk about her experiences here of translating. So you translated one chapter of the Sanskrit portion, and the Sanskrit portion is, the largest portion, of course, of the report. So could you just start by telling us about your academic background and what your connection to the contents of the Usman Report are, and how this impacted your translation?
Yeah, so I'm a Vayakana linguist, so it was a bit, I'm coming from a bit different approach from a lot of people, I think. And, sorry, recovering from COVID. All right, so yeah, so I'm a specialist in Sanskrit, and I'm particularly interested in Kannada as well, and sort of the confluence of those traditions. And my PhD thesis I'm writing right now is on the confluence of Sanskrit and Kannada Vyakarana. So I was translating the response of K. Shesha Shastri, who's a Vaidya from the kingdom of Mysore. He wrote a response in Sanskrit, but wrote it in the Kannada script, which is sort of how I got drafted into this. And the language is still, it's highly, vernacular Sanskrit, I would say, where you can see a lot of Kannada in it. Yeah, that's about all I wanted to say on that first question. I had a lot to say, though, about what stood out to me. So can I go into that?
Yeah. So so what is your main takeaway then from the chapter that you translated? What stood out to you most?
Yeah. So again, I really like looking at the language here. It's when we say, like Sanskrit, like we just read it, but it was really fun to just see someone being almost like playful and creative with the language. So one challenge that stood out to me was there are a lot of archaic constructions. So one thing that I remember learning Sanskrit, and that was like, you'll never look at this. And then this guy's using all these intensive forms. So that's like a form that like you barely use, that's like communicates like habituality, but like, intense habituality. And so this posed some challenges. For example, when we're talking about like, he loved using it with this root vrit vartate, which just sort of means to be in like a highly spatial sense. So it was sort of hard to figure out, how do I get the meaning here of this grammatical form you don't have? Yeah, another thing I liked, there are a couple of terms he used that seem a bit weird in Sanskrit, but I remember from studying Kannada the AIS of words that stood out to me, because I was like, oh, these are words that are Sanskrit, so I know them. So one was for student, saying vidyarthi, or like someone who's like searching, or whose goal is knowledge, which is a bit weird to use as a standard word in Sanskrit, but is something I recognize even now. There are a lot of neologisms that I found delightful. So he talked a lot about the plague. So it was a very specific instance where in the 20th century there was like a devastating plague in the kingdom of Mysore. And in the 1920s, they would have just been getting out of that. So Shesha Shastri talked a lot about the failures of Western medicine there, and sort of implied that, you know, it was the Ayurvedic practitioners who were really doing the groundwork. Yeah, so the when we're talking about the actual content, one thing I really appreciated was Shesha Shastri's sort of like knowledge of like administrative stuff and economic stuff. So one big theme in his study is just how little support Ayurveda needs compared to Western medicine, but how like the government is even failing there. You know, he says like we need much less than Western medicine, and he gives like a very good like critique of the political economy of the colonialism, where he talks about they take all these ingredients from India, they take them to America, make these medicines, ship them back to India, and it's all more expensive, and these doctors are so full of themselves and need a big salary. But Ayurveda needs less, and even then we don't get enough. So I thought all that's talk was fun. He was very
that is a discourse that you yeah, that's a discourse that you find even today. It's a very common discourse found even in discussions about medicine today in India.
Okay, that's great to hear.
Very often. Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Jane. Any final thoughts on the report, on your testimony?
I think I said about all I wanted to. So.
Yeah, so I think that the language was very interesting in the report, that in the testimony that you looked at, and sort of breadth of learning shown both in the use of language and then also in the kinds of things he could speak about. I think that was quite impressive. I would like to finally move on, because now I do see I've been told in the chat that indeed Dr. Trupti has been here all along. I apologize, I for some reason didn't see you here, because Dr. Trupti translated most of the Sanskrit portion. So we asked Jane Ulrich to do one portion that had been written in Kannada script, but Dr. Trupti did pretty much all of the rest. And we had one further translator, Dr. Vinod M., who is not here today. But so Dr. Trupti's work was, as I said before, really heroic in just the sheer mass of translation that she did. I think it added up to almost 90 pages of Sanskrit that you translated. So it's a huge effort made here in quite a short time, I would add. Could you tell us a bit about your background and your connection with the contents of the Usman Report, and how this impacted your translation, please, Dr. Trupti? You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi. Am I audible? Okay, it's really great to meet you all today online, and congratulations to the whole team. And I'm basically an academician from Maharashtra, Pune, and a researcher. And translation is not a very regular thing for me. I'm not really involved in much of literary works. So I really enjoyed this first task of, a literary research or, a translation work, which came my way. I'm very thankful to Borain, who has introduced myself to Dagmar. And talking about the interviews, I have done, I think, many of them, and it was really a great experience, because they had differences in their expressions, their style. The aggression was different. Some were very positive, some were very much, I would say, balanced. Some were absolutely aggressive. And I had really fun in translating that. And yes.
Yes, you mentioned the the aggression. So I think that some of them had anger at some of the quite leading questions, like questions, we had questions like, does your medicine need to be updated with modern science? And then many of them had quite fiery things to answer to that. Yeah, did you have a favorite testimony or just a favorite quote from them, something that really stuck out to you as particularly special?
Okay, I just saw the report online and it's a huge thing. So for a favorite quote, I have to go through the whole report once again, because I managed to go through it very quickly today, because I couldn't really cover the whole report today. So there are many quotes, I think, but I'll have to choose one and I'll share it with you.
Yes, I mean, I should say, like I drafted you into the translation. Thank you to Dr. Brian Larios, who connected us. And of course, you are a practicing Vaidya. And during the time that you were making the translations, you were also on COVID detail. I remember seeing pictures of you with the sort of protective gear and so on. So doing this translation, this huge amount of translation in your free time, I feel particularly grateful to all the work that you did here.
Yes, thank you so much. And I enjoyed this because Sanskrit language is so beautiful. It has a capacity to express so much meaning in very small, words. Like a very short script can actually explain so much. And it was possible for me because I have some idea about the basics of Ayurveda. Otherwise, it's not possible. So I had a clue.
Yeah, certainly very difficult.
So it had a big role in my being able to translate so much because I had some idea about what they are talking about.
Yes, for sure. I mean, some of us had to use dictionaries quite extensively to help with the translation. Yeah, though, of course, modern practice understands some concepts a bit differently from maybe the traditional understandings. Things change over time, but it certainly sort of the nuances of what is meant is so much easier to access if you're very deeply steeped in tradition and know what they're talking about for practice elements.
Yes,
for sure. Yeah, I feel I am hogging the conversation. Christelle, would you like to take over with any questions?
Maybe a question to Tripti. I was not able to go through the whole Sanskrit translation, and I was wondering if there is something very surprising that would be in these testimonies that would be absent from the, would say, common conception or training that we have now from the old Samhitas. I would say some kind of maybe a naive question, because it's a question of a textualist regarding practice. So yeah.
Okay, can you please elaborate? I couldn't really understand it completely.
So I would like to know if there is in the text you translated some kind of a specific difference to what you knew about the Ayurvedic practices or Ayurvedic conception notions.
No, the concepts are actually the basic concepts are same, and they are from the Brihatrayas. But there are some streams, like some of the acharyas, they follow Vata Pitta Kapha more, and some of the acharyas, they will follow Panchabhautika more. So even that thing is existent in practice right now also.
Yeah.
These streams are in practice. The questions which were asked at that time in 1983, some of them are valid even now.
Okay. So basically, there is no difference from it is in the line of what we can find nowadays as Ayurvedic practice. Yes.
Actually, with integration now, I think we can manage it in a better way than what we could at that time.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
With integration of modern medicine, or what do you mean with integration?
Actually, Pratyaksha Praman is something very important. Pratyaksha means a direct, perception of the senses, direct perception of any knowledge through the senses. So whatever modern techniques that we are using for investigations, right? So they are actually implementation of Pratyaksha Praman. So with these techniques, it's very much possible for us to actually see what's happening with a CT, with a MR, or things like that. So we can implement Ayurveda in a better way because we can use the technology for relying on Pratyaksha more and Anuman less.
Yes, and so these were things that were not available to the practitioners of 1923, of course. Yeah.
So with more efficiency, we can actually manage things now, because even with pure Ayurveda, with the help of the technology.
Yeah, that's the first time that I've heard somebody state that so clearly. Looking at the history of the Shuddha Ayurveda or integrated syncretic forms and so on. So this is the first time I was thinking about the use of instruments for pratyaksha and for diagnosis and so on. It's very interesting. For time, because time is moving on, I would like to move on to the next translator, who also did quite a big portion, namely the Urdu one, and this is Dr. Sabrina Datu. And so, Sabrina, you translated the Urdu parts. We had one more translator called Ariane Hopp from the University of Heidelberg, who's not here today. So could you tell us a little bit about your background and your translation and what your main takeaway is from your part of the report?
Sure, I'll try to be succinct. So my background training is in history. I'm a historian of modern South Asia, colonial South Asia. I work on Urdu language medical texts in print. So I'm interested particularly in the Madrasa Tibbiya, its history, and situating it within a longer genealogy of Abyssinian or Unani medical concepts and practices. So my research is focused on how the Madrasa Tibbiya incorporates technoscience into the practice and thought of modernizing Unani medicine. So that is my historical training, which meant that I was familiar with the conceptual vocabulary of Abyssinian medicine or Unani medicine, of Aristotelian theories of causality, which came up in there. As far as my language training goes, I'm not a native speaker of the Urdu language. My mother tongue is an Indian language. It's a dialect called Kutchi, which is a pidgin kind of Gujarati and Sindhi. So Urdu is was not a reach, but it was something I learned as an adult. I was also trained in Urdu at the University of Chicago and at the American Institute of Indian Studies in Lucknow. I had many years of Urdu training. So I translated this towards the end of my graduate work as I was finishing my degree. And I think my training affected my it was sort of, I think there was an unanticipated relationship between my training and the text, because what surprised me about this material is that many of the Urdu language testimonies were about medical content that was not Unani medicine. It was Ayurveda, or it was a hybrid between not so much Western and Ayurveda, but a kind of triangulation across three traditions or across Unani and Ayurveda. So the Ayurvedic portion of it, I was on less firm conceptual ground because much of that vocabulary was unfamiliar to me and remains unfamiliar to me. That's definitely something I need to continue to read up on. So I think I was at a remove from those voices because the medical tradition was different, but also because these were not canonical figures. So many of you have spoken about the practitioners whose work you translated that have known genealogies about whom there is a historiography. The men in my report, with the exception of Pandit Sharma, Thakur Dutt Sharma, he is somebody who's come up in my own research as a Ved who had a periodical in the period in which I'm studying. I was familiar with him and his biography, but the rest, their histories, their biographies remain obscure to me. So that was the background with which I approached the report. Those are some of the challenges I found in translating the report. What was interesting about it, an important takeaway, I think, was this question of the multiple registers that several other participants have mentioned, and that there were multiple registers within the Urdu, and very regional Urdus were being spoken. It's not one language that was uniformly used across testimonies. And also that, the impression of, I think it's important to have this translated into English, and I tried to translate it into a kind of broadly accessible English, because I think it disrupts the notion of Urdu as a parochial language, as a Muslim language, as a religious language. You can see here that this is very much a language being used to communicate secular science, as has been argued by the late Kavita Dattla in a book of hers on Urdu nationalism and linguistic nationalism in Urdu in Hyderabad. So I think that was important for me. And the capaciousness of the medical thought, I mean, it's borrowings across not only so-called Islamic languages, Arabic, Persian, Urdu, but the incorporation and interpolation of English and Sanskrit. That was quite remarkable. I'm not sure if we have.
Yeah, no, I realize also the Sanskrit words that it was sometimes hard. Anyway, you spot a strange looking word, it's transliterated into the Urdu script, and then you have a Sanskrit word. And for me, it was quite funny to come across these Sanskrit words that I'm much more familiar with, a slightly odd spelling, as it were, because of the transliteration into Urdu. So just showing this, that the learning of these Hakims, of these Vaids, was very broad, and that they knew more than just their local medicine and their local language. And so it was very interesting to see these different levels in these reports, I would say. Yeah, did you have a favorite quote that you could share with us from any of the ones that you read?
I do, actually. This is from Pandit Vaid Thakur Dutt Sharma. I just pulled it up because this was something that had stayed with me when I was translating. I'll just read it. It's a few sentences. This is of my translation. So he's talking about different Ayurvedic sciences, again, with which I'm not familiar, and you can fill us in on the background of these. He says, this is not to mention Rasayan Tantra, which eradicates conditions like age, diseases which can't be cured by medicine, and even premature death. There is no doubt that Veds are no longer using this. However, that is because there is no formal arrangement for offering this kind of education. These kinds of medications must be administered with great caution. They remake the whole body. A new body is created and the old one left behind. An old man becomes young again. This is not a deception. And I love this sort of the promise held out and sort of the ways in which this particular idiom of hope has a kind of, it meets in some aims also the idiom of hope that's in religious experience or in prayer, like the body being remade. And I thought that was quite remarkable. And I think it also speaks to, the condition of being ill and that sense of being open to such a range of possibilities that, that desperation to find something to remake the body anew. So I thought that was quite moving. But I'm not familiar with Rasayan Tantra, but that actually, its history and its appropriateness of usage here.
It's actually, to me, it's very familiar because it's a very traditional part of Ayurveda. So even the oldest of the Ayurvedic treatises have whole sections devoted to them on Rasayana, on this renewal of the body. So we found, when we were looking at the 20th century, that we found several sources that said it's not used anymore, it's not done anymore. And then we find a sort of reinvention of Rasayana as Kaya Kalpa. Suzanne Newcomb has written about this. So it becomes something that is practiced not so much by Ayurvedic practitioners, but by sadhus and by yogis and so on. So the sort of location of this knowledge seems to have shifted over time from traditional Ayurvedic practitioners to these groups of people. But now I think it's been sort of reinstated as part of Ayurvedic education. Actually, you know, I think Dr. Trupti could probably tell us more about and so on, about this form of medicine. But I like your comment about the you know, the optimism expressed in this. I agree. Yeah, thank you. Well, now we should, I'm so sorry, I would love to talk so much longer with everybody, but we should really move on to our Dr. D.V. Kanagaratinam, who, as Dr. Trupti did, translated a very large part of the report, namely the Tamil part. And I will give the word, first of all, to Dr. Christelle Barrois, who worked very intensively on the Tamil part with Dr. Kanagaratinam. Thank you so much, Sabrina.
Yes. It is my pleasure to see Kavi here. And we met, I think, in July 2019 in Tübingen. We both were participating in a conference organized by Roman Siller, Medicine, Religion and Alchemy in South India, Resources and Permutation of Siddha Tradition and Siddha Medicine. So, and I was very pleased that Kavi accepted just to take up this translation. So I will immediately let him speak about his work and explain how his academic background just is related to the content of the Usman Report, and then maybe a few details that I would like to ask him. Please, Kavi.
Thank you, Crystal, as well as Dagmar, for given this wonderful opportunity. Actually, I'm a historian, particularly historian of South Indian medicine. I have been working on indigenous medicines, in particular Madras Presidency, for my PhD thesis. After that, currently I'm doing a postdoctoral fellow in IIT Madras. So I'm working on history of Siddha medicine, particularly in the colonial period. And so when you look at Usman Committee, it was much more important report for the Siddha historians, because from that 1921, after the formation of the Usman Committee, only we can find out the word Siddha or Tamil medicine as a separate medical system. Before that, we don't find out anything about a separate medical identity. Right. Am I able? Am I audible? Yeah. So before coming into this project, I know the Usman Committee report, because which is very essential. And then after meeting, as Prashant pointed out, that we met in German, and then she asked. I think I sent a mail to Crystal that if you have any opportunity to work something, then I'm happy to that. Then Crystal sent a message, yeah, there is one project like this. Then I told that, okay, I'm so happy to that. But really, I'm not a natural translator or something like that. I was a little bit hesitate. I was a little bit fear, because though my mother tongue is Tamil, but 100 years back, the language of Tamil is not what we are speaking now. It's a mixture of Sanskrit, more poetic, and very particularly when we coming to the Siddha medicine, it's Paribhasha. That is a very encrypted language or secret languages, all these things. But then I thought it, okay, take it as a challenge, at least, okay, we do that, and I coming into this project. And very particularly when takeaways of this project means, as I already mentioned, that the Siddha was established or started to establish from the Usman Committee itself. When you're going for before formation of the Usman Committee, even before coming out of the report came into 1923, and 1924 is the second part of the report. But before coming out of the report, in 1921 onwards, you can look at the separation or construction of Siddha medicine in vernacular press, vernacular print media. But much more the official recognition from the colonial state coming from the Usman report itself. Before that, it was not recognized, it was not accepted. and different type of voices for as a historian and for knowing that particular period of political social conditions, I can easily understand the voices and the background of the physicians. When you look at Ayurvedic physicians, whether they written in English or in the Tamil, they simply say that my medical practice is Ayurveda. I'm going to use it as Ayurveda. But you can find out the different type of identity was pronounced by the Siddha physician. Tamil Ayurveda, Dravidian Ayurveda, this is all is coming with the Siddha. So these type of thing I can understand easily because I know the socio-political conditions of that period of time and the confusion about the indigenous physicians, particularly Tamil physicians. And second thing, the Tamil physician is not only trying to put it equal to Ayurveda. It's not the case. They wanted to put it above the Ayurveda. They told that Ayurveda is a plagiarized version of Siddha. Even you can look at the main protagonist like Gurudev Sivanyana Yogi, Sanghuvananda Swamigal, they put it that even the Nadisha, the pulse technology, diagnostic techniques of the pulse and other thing they have taken from Tamil Siddha medicine. It was metals and minerals was not mentioned much during Charaka Shamgida Shushuda. It was taken from Tamil medicine. It was added by Nagarjuna. It was added later by Sarangada Samhita. So it's more or less we should be very aware about the current political, social, economical scenario. Then only we can understand the full the expression or full the constructions of Siddha medicine. And very important, what it's very helpful to me after these translations, some important texts which are not aware today, particularly by Tirumandiram Ennoyal, 8000. Usually Tirumandiram we all aware, but Tirumular 8000, that is Ennoyal we consider. Even I was discussing with much of the Siddha physicians as well as Siddha students when I'm going to, because I'm searching that book. It was Gurudev Sivanyana extensively used the quotations and poems from that textbook, and that was not available. Even when I'm asking this, they told, yeah, Tirumular, Tirumandiram. No, I know Tirumular, Tirumandiram. There is a person using Tirumular NIL 8000, which is not available now. Even the students are not aware. Then I'm sending these quotes from the Usman committee. You see, the physicians of Siddha physicians use this. So if you come across anything, please let me know that. So in one way or other, this project helped me or enlightened me, certain textbook which was not possible, means practice or in the usage today. And second thing, this project helps me a lot because other parts of the translation like Sanskrit, I don't know Sanskrit, Urdu, because of this translation of this project, which helps me a lot to go forward for my research. So that way I congratulate both and as well as for the congratulations to the all, and also thank you for as a historian useful this research, because Usman is very, very essential the historian of Siddha medicine. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavi. And I'm not sure if you mentioned that, you know, in this appendix, there is an extended, it's not a place just to discuss that at length, but there is a list of Indian medical works where you have these translations of Sanskrit texts into Tamil, and specifically just alchemical texts, Sanskrit alchemical text into Tamil, and does this is useful, or what do you think about that regarding the recent, I would say, 19th century, 20th century history of Siddha medicine? In a few words, I would.
Yeah. No. Actually, these language identity issues emerged only in the after 1920s. So earlier physicians are very free to collect it, read it, and translate it. You can find out a lot of translations from Sanskrit to the Tamil medical text, means Tamil medicine. So physicians are, even Gurudev Sivanyana Yogi is a very well-versed Sanskrit scholar. He wrote the text in Sanskrit, but he is a very important protagonist in bifurcating the system based on the language. So that is all of this politics, the language politics happen in the 20th century.
Okay, thank you. And if I may, just one very, very short question about I would like you just to say a word about the use, if there is or not, the use of these Tamil testimonies nowadays in some practitioner or academic circles as a resource, maybe, or
as a historian, as I told them, it's a very essential document for the Siddha. But as a practitioner, for Siddha practitioners, when I was meeting with the people, and they are aware, even for Siddha practitioners, Siddha students, BSMS students are aware about the Usman Committee report, but they are not reading.
They are not reading.
Yeah, they are not reading, but they are, Usman Committee, because there is a starting point of their medical traditions, or not a tradition, sorry, that is a politics or systemic identity. So that's why they are aware about Usman Committee, but they are not reading. But I think after the translations, maybe because poetic language of Tamil is very difficult even for the Tamilians to understand. So maybe translation will help them to understand or to read.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Kavi. Oh.
We have one final translator who has been waiting very patiently. This is Anusha Rao, who did the Kannada section. Anusha, would you be so kind to tell us a little bit about your academic background and then about your main takeaway from the chapters that you translated and features that you found interesting?
Sure. Thank you so much for this, and it was really fun listening to everyone. So I work on Vedanta actually, so I know absolutely nothing of Ayurveda or the history of Indian medicine. In working on Vedanta, I work mainly on South India and in the early modern period. So I read Sanskrit texts as well as Kannada ones. So when I was approached to help with the Kannada translation, it was a completely new thing for me. I wasn't familiar with the conceptual terms of Ayurveda. And it was fascinating. It was made all the more so because I was in India at the time, and of course the pandemic was all around us. So I kind of saw so many similarities between the arguments and the links that these Vaidyas are making in the report. Between Ayurveda and allopathy and the kind of tensions there that they're trying to navigate, as we saw with so many of you who spoke earlier, either trying to show how Ayurveda is superior in some way or accepting seemingly that allopathy can do things that indigenous medicine can't, and so on. And it was at this stage in the pandemic where some Ayurveda practitioners in Bangalore, where I was, were actually claiming to have come up with a cure for COVID. And then there was this whole debate around what testing would involve. Is it really double blind? Is the sample size too small? And so on. So this intervention of Western medicine, as these Vaidyas call it, into the realm of indigenous medicine and what kind of intervention it can make. So I was translating with that in mind, and that made it really interesting because I saw this genealogy of this encounter between indigenous medicine and colonialism there. As to my main takeaway from it, so one thing that stood out to me was this kind of genealogy. So I was going through the introduction to the report, and there was the sentence that said the whole Usman report is imbued with this compelled aspiration to comparativism, which I thought expressed it so very well. As to the particular Vaidya whose report I translated, he makes this vehement claim that Ayurveda is actually scientific and compatible with allopathic medicine. I don't know, I felt some parts of the report were really incongruous, and those were the most interesting bits. So for one of the questions that he's asked, which is about the theory of causation of disease in Ayurveda, his answer is basically simply there are two kinds of causation, one because of transgressions you've committed in the past life, and another because of transgressions you've committed in this life. That's it. But then in the next question, he goes on to elaborate in great detail on the actual biological symptoms and how to diagnose. And that seems really well thought out, formulated, something he has studied very deeply. So, and he recognizes that Western medicine, as he calls it, or allopathy, seems to have the upper hand when it comes to surgeries. So he does say that we should adapt the methods of Western medicine when it comes to research and surgery. But we have seen so many cases of like incurable diseases or chronic diseases that allopathy cannot possibly cure, and then these patients come to Ayurveda and they get cured. So he argues that Indians should adapt Western research to their own interests, and that both these kinds of medicine would come together and result in the same conclusions. So that was one of the bits I found most interesting. The other rather cute thing he says was about how in the cities restaurants are causing all these big problems and lead to a huge waste of money because people fall sick by eating restaurant food, and also teenagers apparently pilfer money from home to eat outside. So he suggests as a medical recommendation that restaurants in cities be shut down. So that was one of my favorite passages. I think I had one favorite quote too, if I could read that. He says, if a similar research procedure, that is as the Western one, is methodologically followed with regard to research in our system, then we will find that the true conclusion of both are the same. Jaggery is sweet in every country and black pepper is spicy in every country. So this to me indicated his like firm belief that if only we do double-blind like studies or whatever kind of research they do in the West, then we will end up with the conclusion that both systems tell us the same thing, only their method is different. The end goal is the same.
That's a very nice, optimistic note to end on, I think, for this part of our conversation. I'd like to open the stage for all the translators. If you have questions for each other, for the other parts of the translation, whether you would like to ask each other some questions, and please just feel free to unmute yourself, and if you can sort of, if you're sort of curious about the translations of others. I was just thinking about Dr. Kavi's translation of the language. The Tamil language was so interesting to me, and so such very lively images being used. And my favorite one was that asking the colonial government and the modern medicine to design, a curriculum and an institutional setup for indigenous medicine was like lighting one's beard on fire and using it to light one's pipe. And I think this quote just gives you sort of an idea of the liveliness of the Tamil part, and I think this is also true for many of the other vernacular reports. So please, to you, please, for the translators to begin with, if you have any questions to each other, this would be a good point to ask them. Just raise your hands, maybe, or maybe Christelle can also ask another question.
Yeah, I would have. No, I'm actually. The Usman report as such is very interesting, but I feel also very interesting to hear the translator talking about the Usman report. And there is a kind of a subjective dimension, which is also very, like immediately you can feel that a translation is also, in a way, interpretation, or at least that there is a kind of a intimacy with the text that it goes to another field, which is the question of the translation. But I feel this is very, very interesting. And my question would be to all of the translator, what would be, according to you, the following in terms of research or to the publication of the Usman report? What would you like to continue? Is there something like to do more about the content you just discovered, or something. Yeah.
I can start by saying something I just alluded to, that this showed me just how much interesting Sanskrit there is after moments we think that, oh, it's all gone. So it's definitely, I can't say anything definite, but it's definitely brought to my attention all the interesting things that are written that no one looks at in the 19th and 20th centuries that are written in Sanskrit.
Yeah, that's a really good point about, the modern Sanskrit. It's quite traditional Sanskrit, but I remember Trupti telling me, about how all the Vaidyas writing in Sanskrit, that they had very different modes of expression, very different ways of expressing sometimes the same concepts and so on. So you have a sort of localized Sanskrit. So, sort of various forms of modern Sanskrit that were quite interesting. Suzanne, please.
So I haven't, my question's more, I've read a lot of the English of the Usman Report, and also have read a lot of kind of modern Ayurvedic government reports and kind of what syllabuses and testimonies. And when I was reading the Usman Report testimonies, I was really struck by which is something that a few of the translators have also commented on, the different kinds of positionalities between the different sorts of medicines. And there seemed to be this real intellectual grappling with, like, what does this all mean? And I don't see that kind of grappling going on so much in the 21st century. And I was just kind of wondering, the translators who also have experience of contemporary vernacular medical traditions, is there still this kind of real explorative potential in seeking either for a unitive truth, or has the recent kind of government innovations and standardization and quality control and export of indigenous traditions kind of stifled that, what I found really richness in the historical sources? Sorry if that was a really difficult question.
We have Dr. Trupti as our practitioner here. Would you like to comment on this?
The situation is quite good now, because in India, a lot of shift towards Ayurveda is seen, and people started believing. I think every household has Ayurvedic interventions in their house. That we have since thousands of years, but now even the products are available very easily. The plants are available in in houses. Products are available in every medical shop. If you just enter, you will see about 50 products lined up there, which are OTC products, and people prefer to use that. So I'm sure the trend is changing in India, and I think we will dominate the system of medicine in few years.
Thanks.
No, in the part of government, I think now the governments are supporting to Ayurveda. Even I can say, no, there is a debate on BJP government, but in the case of after coming of this, the Modi government, I think the projects given to the universities are the thing to development of Ayurveda or Ayurvedic projects or everything. There is a political way, there is a different opinion on government, but particularly the projects of indigenous medicine supporting to that. It's somehow, I think, better than the earlier governments. In coming with the Tamil Nadu, Tamil region, after coming up this DMK government recently last year, and they started giving more importance to Siddha medicine, and at least funding has been increased. Even there's for the National Institute of Siddha was established. One, it is in Tambaram now in Chennai. But after coming of this new government last year, they initiated another university for exclusive for the Siddha medicine. So I think one way to other way is language nationalism, or maybe the regional languageism, regional politics. All these things may have certain role to play along with these cultural practices. You can find out this from even 1920s, Justice Party government. After coming of the Justice Party government, only this Usman committee was formed. So you can find out even for the 1970, after the DMK government coming up the position as a government, then only again for the Siddha committee was established and the funds were allocated. Then Siddha books were again published in the 1920 under the Palani Dandayadavani Temple Trust. You can see a lot of Siddha text again manuscript to printed format. Or maybe the older printed books which are not much more available. So you can see that this connection with the politics much more with these indigenous medical practices.
Yeah, Sabrina.
Yeah, thank you. I thought that was a very interesting question and a very provocative one, because I think there's a lot there, Suzanne's question, that we could tease out about the contrast between the intellectual self-criticism, self-doubt, and a willingness to entertain kind of new ways of thinking about these long genealogies of tradition. That space, the grappling that you're speaking of, I mean, for those of us observing from outside who are not practitioners, I don't work with practitioners, who are just observing the press or public discourse, it's very easy to believe that that space of intellectual grappling has been closed. And that while it may well be that there's been a proliferation of Ayurvedic products on the market and an increase in its institutionalization, the questions about whether or not that is in fact a good thing, I mean, one wonders if that is being asked with the same degree of seriousness, particularly by medical doctors in India, because obviously there are medical practitioners who practice in vernacular languages, whether it's Hindi or Urdu or Tamil or whatever, that have an MBBS. They're not Ayurvedic practitioners. So I'm, very curious about the experiences of those people who work with practitioners of indigenous traditions, so-called indigenous traditions, but their interactions with medical practitioners who have, I wouldn't say it's a Western education after all, pepper and jaggery taste the same universally everywhere. So that biomedicine, that tradition, and its engagement with indigenous practitioners today, if there is a space for conversation, a genuine conversation.
Yes, I saw earlier in the chat that Dr. Nadeshwar Kanuri has been wanting to speak, and I think you are, in fact, an MBBS or a biomedicine practitioner. Is that correct?
Yeah, am I audible actually first?
Yes.
Yeah, today my microphone is making something. So I'm a different participant from a different background, I think. So I'm patiently hearing everyone, and nice to see different faces. And I don't know anything about Usman Report, but happy to be part of this. So I am from a modern medicine background. I'm a PhD in diabetes and insulin resistance. I worked in India and I came as a postdoc. Now I'm currently staying in United States of America. So my first postdoc, I work in endocrine. Now I'm currently working cardiology actually. But my interest is on Ayurveda and yoga, which I'm thinking to pursue my future research. That's where I'm having a couple of discussions with different people from the background where they have their foots on the Occidental and they have another foot on the Oriental too. So I'm a such person having my foot on there in the research. I'm sitting in my lab now. So I'm in a different background currently where I am, but my future interest is in a different background of combining these two together. Coming from a modern medicine background, I know many people spoke about this. I saw what Dr. Anusha, I think, Anusha was speaking, and any others, all others whom I was passionately listening to. There are people like us, even from modern medicine background, which we feel and which we realize the limitations of modern medicine. That's one thing which is quite evident. And it's not a minor group. There is a major group now. Because one thing that is quite evident in modern medicine is now the people are coming up in this College of Medicine, like I'm with University of Cincinnati. So we have a College of Medicine here where we have an integrative medicine as a department. So previously it was not the part of. So what they're essentially doing is they're trying to bring the modern medicine principles along with yoga, along with Ayurveda, along with acupuncture or other stuff, to make it as an integration where they are including patients to this and this. Though there may be some comments from different people that it's a part of one big industry, that's fine, whatever the comments are. Leaving all those comments together, the positive sign of this is the acceptance rate of the complementary therapies. Here in United States, we call it as complementary therapies, which is the lifestyle modalities and dietary modalities, more than the Occidental the behavior of allopathy, which we say it is an emergency form of medicine. Though allopathy came from an emergency background, and then it has been integrated into different lifestyle disorders. But people like us, we feel that allopathy has its own limitations, the Western principles. Though we do a lot of research, I'm a strong critic of how allopathy deals in the perception of the lifestyle disorders. Lifestyle disorders is not for that. So taking into that part, one comment that I wanted to make is the positive acceptance that people can all see up, like people like you can all feel is the acceptance that we are coming up with. And I also saw one more comment about the Vata, Pitta and Kapha. By the way, actually, I'm here pursuing a professional course in Ayurveda, which in US, actually, it's not a license like in India and other countries. So here, Ayurveda is for 3 years. And the first year, we call it as Ayurvedic Wellness Counselor. In second year, we call it as Ayurvedic Physician. And the third year, we call it as Ayurvedic Doctor. And I'm studying with this an Ayurvedic school called Ananda Ayurveda. And the director of the institute, whom I had a lot of discussions about researching, which I'm interested in future. So she is a Vaidya, third generation Vaidya from India. So it's an authentic Ayurveda. I also listening to Dr. Madan saying about Shuddha Ayurveda. So, and she believes in the concept of Shuddha Ayurveda, but she is also interested in the concept of integrating it to research. And one person, I think Dr. Shruti Bole, she was saying about using these modern technologies and how, what the best we can come up with diagnostic perspective. Yes, I agree to that. The more importance is to integrate the West and the East. If everyone can do that, not everyone, at least the manufacturing, if someone can come as a manufacturer now, which I'm struggling actually because I'm trying to integrate it and I'm trying to make myself change into transition to that research, and which is very difficult to transition at this point of time. So if the manufacturing starts up, it may be a major factor in future. But yes, such integration tools are also coming up with. Recently, I was speaking with one professor from Cambridge. He's a genome biologist from Cambridge, and he is an Ayurveda. Essentially, the link for today's event has been shared by Dr. Madan Tangavelu. If anyone knows from him, he's a genome biologist from Cambridge. He shared me the link, and then I just popped up and I was listening to everyone. So they were doing an instrument, and I also saw some studies from IITs in India that they're trying to diagnose Vata, Pitta, and Kapha from a bioengineering background. They're trying to come up with some technologies to see that. So those things were really fascinating. Hope things comes up in future and we part of it. If anyone has any comments in the modern perspective, I'm happy to discuss and to make some comments.
Thank you, Dr. Kanuri. I saw that Dominic's hand has been up for a while, or was that to another question?
No. Well, I was kind of responding again to Suzanne's. I think a lot of us have kind of, who've thought a lot about the culture and history of these subjects have been a little bit fascinated by that question. For those who haven't met me, I'm a Sanskrit scholar, an Indologist, and a historian of science. I think one can see in the 20th century a trajectory, and the Usman Report is kind of part of the story of a diminishing of the ability to have this kind of wrestling and engagement. I mean, you see it most strongly at the end of the 19th century and maybe the beginning of the 20th, when people still think that medicine is medicine. It's one thing, and we can bring it together. I mean, a very good example of this is that a lot of Ayurvedic texts that were published at the end of the 19th century in the 1890s Hindi translations, for example, of Sushruta and Charaka and so on, are illustrated with drawings and diagrams and copies from European anatomical books, which themselves, of course, go back mostly to Vesalius. So the idea is that, there is a single body, and yes, the other thing you get at that time, and P.S. Varya did this, and others did it too, Gananath Sen, is to produce vocabularies, published vocabularies with names for medical concepts and objects in all the different languages, vernaculars and Sanskrit and English and Latin. So again, that making a vocabulary like that is suggesting that it's just a linguistic problem. Everybody's got a spleen. It's just called something in different languages. What that doesn't address is a deeper problem, which is that Ayurveda thinks about the human body completely differently from the tradition of I would say, post-Enlightenment European medicine that originates I never use the word West. I think it's such a problematic term, but in Europe and America, say. In 1976, Ivan Illich published his explosive book Limits of Medicine, in which he really made the point extremely forcefully that medicine is dominated by politics and the attempt to gain power, and that the politics and the discourse of politics and power is a huge driving force for establishment medicine, but it's also bad for patients. And I just think he was right. I mean, none of us have really learned this lesson, but I don't think he was wrong about it. Meanwhile, in the 20th century, we have developments like the discovery of antibiotics, 1945, the first adult human heart transplant by Christian Barnard in South Africa, 1967, and that huge landmark, 1977, I think, 78, 77, eradication of smallpox. After which the United Nations, or the World Health Organization of the United Nations, announced that their new motto was health for all by the year 2000. They actually thought, the United Nations thought, that human disease would be eradicated by the year 2000. I mean, I can hear the hollow laughter, oh, sure, here we are all sitting with our, in our houses with our masks on. Yeah, eradication of human disease. I don't think so. But nevertheless, these big landmark moments in success of modern establishment medicine have made it incredibly difficult for the kind of wrestling that Suzanne has talked about. It just sounds like, modern establishment medicine is it. They've got the techniques, they've got the equipment, they've got the theoretical underpinning. That's the system that's going to be successful. What I think all of this misses, and I think where wrestling is still valid, is clinical practice. When a physician sits in his room and a patient comes to see him or her, there's a conversation, and those encounters are incredibly human, and they are negotiations, and all sorts of things get said, and all sorts of medicines get recommended that don't fit into this big narrative of, the thunderous success of modern medicine. I mean, I had an encounter like that myself yesterday. I went to the doctor because I had a lot of pain around my neck. And it's not serious, and I'm already getting better, but for 2 or 3 days, I could hardly swallow. I mean, it was quite painful. So I finally went to the doctor. He just diagnosed it as just a muscular spasm that had caused some bruising. And he said, I think the treatment will be a tincture of time. It's a beautiful expression, the tincture of time. In other words, just wait and it will get better by itself. We have the other saying, which is that doctor can treat you with medication and the ailment will be gone in 7 days, or you could just do nothing and the ailment will be gone in a week. All of these are expressions of how medicine is a kind of a soft science at a certain point, at the point of the clinical encounter. And I think that's where where it would be interesting to focus attention and to look for the kinds of integration that Dr. Kanuri is talking about. I mean, I think to try and integrate the theory of Ayurveda and the theories of modern medical establishment science is, you just can't. They've got different views of the body, completely different theoretical underpinning. You're never going to integrate that. And if you try to integrate the medicines, then you're going to be accused of green imperialism and biomedical theft. This whole idea that big pharma goes into countries like Brazil and India and just takes their traditional medicine, reinvents it and packages it and makes $1 million. So I think you have to be a bit careful about trying to integrate, because partly you just can't, and partly it's just actually like these guys in Cambridge that you mentioned, Kanuri, that what do they why would you try to find a biomedical answer for what the doshas are? Why would you ever do that? What's the point? The point is to find an answer in the language of modern medicine that satisfies modern medicine practitioners, but it doesn't do anything for Ayurveda. Why don't we have practitioners in India trying to explain modern medical things in Ayurvedic terms? Have a reciprocal situation that's just as valid. Thank you. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we do, of course, have Ayurvedic practitioners trying to explain modern medicine. But one of the things about the report that didn't get said, but that I find should be said, is the Vaidyas and Hakims and so on, they got a set of questions, and one of them is, what's your medicine? And then they had to sort of explain what their medicine is, and so, ask any modern medical practitioner of biomedicine, what's your medicine, and let them explain what it is on a page or two, or maybe 10 or 15. I just thought that this sort of asking for a quick explanation of what this medicine was quite an ask for the report, and a sort of quite naive way of starting off what it is. But I was just going back to this idea of soft medicine and what medicine achieves. And this is something that I was struck with Jan Meulenbelt, an article by Jan Gerrit Meulenbelt, who many of you know, or the history of Indian medical literature. He had compiled over 30 years. And he wrote an article about the changing of certain concepts in Ayurveda and how it was the concept of ojas. And so he shows through literature in the 20th century how there were various new interpretations of what ojas means according to some of biomedical developments and sort of circumstances that had changed, so to sort of explain it as energy or as something else. But he ends his article with something that I found very meaningful, and that is, it doesn't really matter what you interpret ojas is. What matters is how is the patient after the encounter with the doctor. And this is really what counts, whether this is an Ayurvedic doctor or an integrated Ayurveda or a Shuddha Ayurveda, or the same would apply to Unani and Siddha, of course. In the end, it's the patient's experience that is the important bit here.
Can I comment on two things?
Sure.
I don't want to take the discussion obviously more than Usman Report, which is most the important thing of discussion today, but to speak about what Dominic was speaking, the integration aspect. So what we are speaking now is an Ayurveda or Siddha, mostly Ayurveda and Yoga, because these terms have already came to West, and here I'm sitting in US, and then here we speak a lot in Ayurveda. So in order to make it global, everything has to be evidence now. That's the fortunately or unfortunately, that's how the world sees it. It needs to be, if something needs to be more globalized without evidence, no one understands. So what happens is the history of mankind has came up with inventing instruments, and now the instrument, what it does is it says that whether the human being is good or bad. So they have invented instruments for lipid profiles, and now we have lipid profiles and glucose to say that whether we are good or bad. That's how it is now. This is what the century is, and this is how it goes. So if we are interested, like being a researcher, and I'm interested in integrating things with East and West, that's what I was from my childhood. Being in that background, we all see for integration and evidence. There is a concept here for researchers like us called publish or fetch. If you don't publish, you'll just perish. So in that perspective, with evidence is what more important. And one point that Dominic was telling is about what we get in the form of an evidence from different experiments and that we do for Ayurveda. What comes for Ayurveda? Yes, I know nothing comes for Ayurveda because the Acharyas, Sharkacharya and all they're doing from thousands of years, they did it and it's established from at least 5,000 to 10,000 years. But if we need to make it globalized without having an evidence of what Vata, Pitta and Kapha does, I know that we say it as doshas, doshati doshaha, and it means that we cannot see that in our body. But how it translates to the functioning of an organs, if we cannot say to the modern world in the form of an evidence, then it will be strictly localized and indigenous medicine to India. It doesn't become globalized. If we want to make it globalized, this is how it is. If Dr. Madan or someone has any comments to share, I'm happy to discuss. Not here, maybe in future too. Because I'm seriously thinking about transition of doing those things. I'm really interested in knowing more, learning more, and discussing more.
I think there's an unexamined assumption in what you say that globalization is a good thing, and it may not be a worthwhile goal. Anyway, just a thought.
I agree, but things will not be. Ayurveda and Vedanta is not about the linear approach, it's the dynamic approach and the non-linear approach. And this non-linear approach goes to something is echoing actually. I think this non-linear approach will take it continuously because we feel it is a linear approach, but it never stays linear. Life has to go with a non-linear approach. And this non-linear approach brings it to globalization.
Sabrina, I think you have something more to... Sorry, may I give the word to Sabrina?
Sure.
Thank you. I think this question about globalization is a fascinating one. And I also think that Dr. Kanuri was talking about lifestyle diseases as being the site at which Ayurveda might be most efficacious and most palatable to people in the US, chronic conditions for which biomedicine doesn't have a pill or a quick remedy, which I think is sort of what emerges even in the Usman Report. At the same time, the very people that might be amenable to looking for complementary therapies to the limits that they've encountered with biomedicine may not necessarily find the idiom of, laboratory verification of the doshas to be the most persuasive reason for consuming or finding an Ayurvedic practitioner. Typically, when people are living with chronic disease that has not been efficaciously treated by biomedicine, they're at a position where they need something more, that they're now looking for not just a whole body medical practitioner, but hope, something beyond the concrete body. And I think it may be limiting to say biomedicine is incapable of offering that, because when we look at research today on things like the microbiome that are integrating mind and body in a way that has explanatory power and may be efficacious, I think that it makes the opposition between whole body East and anatomized body West a little bit more complicated, a little bit difficult to sustain. That's it. That was my.
Sorry, it's interesting that there's no mention in the Usman Report of homeopathy. And homeopathy had been present in India since the 1850s with the work of John Honigberger, but it doesn't seem to register at all in the. I wondered if anyone had any comments on that.
There is some homeopathy, but it's only sort of described within the Ayurveda and Unani. But sorry, Jane, you have something to say about.
Oh, my author briefly mentioned that, and he used it as sort of a dig at English medicine, as he said, where he said they can't agree on anything. Look at all these new fads, like homeopathy.
want to say that in the oral testimonies, there's a whole lot of other kinds of therapies that are also described, like heliotherapy and so on. So there's sort of like bits and pieces, and one shouldn't forget also of the testimonies that were submitted, 183, only a part of that actually made it into the published report. So we don't know quite, what else was submitted, and I don't think there was any letters sent out specifically to homeopaths, but there may have been some people talking a bit more about homeopathy and naturopathy, for example, also as modes of treatment. Yes, Dom.
So that the question of the unpublished responses has arisen a few times here. And I wondered if someone in Madras, in Chennai, maybe Dr. Kanaka Ratnam or someone might be able to go to the Tamil State Archives in Chennai and see if there's any archival materials that has been preserved since the 1923 report. I mean, there might be minutes of meetings, but these unpublished reports might actually be there in the archive.
Yeah, sure, sir. Yeah, if I get it, because of COVID situation, I'm in Coimbatore, my hometown. After this, maybe if I go for the source collection, I used to go to the Chennai archives. If I get it, I will toss to you.
That would be interesting.
I don't know whether you know me or not. I think 6-7 years back, I sent a mail to you regarding some text. You mailed me also. Thank you for that. Yeah, really. If I get it, any report regarding this, I will send to this. I scanned it. I sent to that.
I went to the
maybe also
Tamil
Dr.
National
Madan
Archives.
Kumar might also be able.
Sorry, I went to the Tamil National Archives myself a number of years ago, in 1990s sometime, but I had quite different questions at that time. So.
Yes, I was just thinking of Dr. Madan, thinking about what kinds of things, also Dr. Trupti, what kinds of things, modern practitioners are actually researching, is history something that you might be interested in looking into more, finding these archives, looking at these archives, or is this such as something that, for you doesn't really play a big role in your thinking anymore, and you don't really have a use for it so much for your modern practice? Would you be interested to see, for example, the other Malayalam testimonies, the 23 other ones that didn't make it into the report? So I was thinking, Dr. Madan, perhaps you have something to say about that.
Yes, I'm looking forward. I was asking this question to the subgroups also regarding this, like why is it the only thing? Where are the other things? Is it possible? And I was talking to Ravi Moose also. I was asking, like, is it possible to get the other stuff, remaining stuffs? But because we lack a lot of Malayalam literature, as we are telling, like as a part of what we use the word so-called modernization of Ayurveda, which is taking place and which some people call it as globalization of Ayurveda. So what happening is, like, the original Ayurveda stuff is like reducing. And we have all the translated new version of Ayurveda coming out, which is like, if you see the curriculum Ayurveda textbooks, like we have like about 90% modern textbooks and 10% Ayurvedic textbooks. So we don't have anything, because they said this is modernization. This is how Ayurveda has to be, because you talk more translation things. And even what happened here in Ayurveda education system here in Kerala is like we started losing the regional language textbooks. That was our sole preparation. That's where the original Ayurveda, what we had was, because if I want to read what is original thing, I have to read not an English text, I have to read the regional translation textbook, which is missing. And I think if you find such reports which is written in Malayalam, we could get more idea regarding what exactly those people who were dealing Ayurveda was thinking about. So I think that's a very important part, which I'm looking forward to that. And let me see, because we have like one of the historical libraries in Government Ayurveda College Tiruvananthapuram. So let me see whether such, because some of things are in the manuscriptology department, I will see if there are some old literature or anything regarding that. We'll try to check. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I see time has really passed on. It was supposed to end at well, what for me is 10:30, and when we've moved on, perhaps we should start closing down. Would anybody like to just say some final words? I was thinking maybe Christelle had a final thing to say.
I'm just very interested with all this discussion. We can just through this discussion see how the Usman report raises new questions on, for example, globalization. I've been also, I see, for example, the status of the language for the Urdu, for example. So there are some questions that go beyond the question of medicine. And also, of course, the question of the continuation of the Usman report research proper with these archive things. So thank you very much for this discussion, and yes.
For a wrap up, Suzanne, please. Yeah.
I just wanted to, I don't know if everyone here realizes how much effort Dagmar put into this. This was the first thing she talked to me about in like 2014 maybe, and it has taken like consistent effort year after year to bring this to publication. So I just want to congratulate her and all her collaborators for the perseverance and incredible amount of work this time.
Thank you very much, and my thanks goes out to the translators, so many of whom I asked quite last minute and who put in all this work and their time and so much effort into this. So thank you very much. I'm so pleased it is now published. I hope it will be used widely and that people will find it interesting, and that there are many more things that will be based on this translation forthcoming. And thank you all for coming to this meeting, and for all the work and for your time. Thank you. And thanks, Ilona, also, sorry, thank you for your help with the translations also, Tamil special parts. All right, I wish you all a good day, night, weekend, all the best to everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Bye, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you, Trupti. To end the meeting. Okay. Bye, Suzanne. Really nice seeing you. Bye, Daniela. Bye-bye.